Hi, I'm Roberta Matutson, and I'm the author of Can We Talk? 7 Principles for Managing Difficult Conversations at Work. On today's show, we talk about how to have difficult conversations remotely. We're also discussing why difficult conversations are the key to strong relationships at work. And we'll talk about why you can't find the truth on your own, and sometimes why the most difficult conversation you may need to have is about you and your leadership style.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty, Tips for Executives. Angela she's an outstanding leader who sometimes struggles to have those difficult conversations that feel, for her, potentially conflictual. To be clear, we've worked together on those things as a C-suite executive, with very high, she is just this lady with really great levels of self-awareness, and she's become actually very highly effective at delivering those conversations. However, the breakthrough for her came when she and I were discussing the fact that on the same day that she needed to have a difficult conversation with one of her VPs, her CEO wanted to have a talk with her. Suddenly, she had this understanding that as anxious as she was leading a conversation, a difficult conversation, the person on the other end was also at least as uncomfortable. So the question is there a way to genuinely manage difficult conversations, particularly when you might be on a lower rung of a hierarchy of power? Well, stay tuned, because that's where we're going on the next 2 episodes. As always, we need your help in staying relevant, so please get yourself over to wherever it is that you tune into podcasts, and do us a favor, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. If you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners, and we are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. By the way, I know you're curious. I'm Dov Baron, and I'm your host, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. Curious to know more? Simply go to dovbaron.com, dovbaron.com. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. Listen, difficult conversations are the mainstay, not just of leadership, but rather any and every relationship. Sometimes you have to communicate with someone less powerful than you. Sometimes it's peer communication. Sometimes it's up that power ladder. And you and I both know it takes 2 people to engage in a healthy dialogue, particularly if you want meaningful outcome. But is that really possible in what can feel like a potentially volatile situation? Well, you might be surprised. Let's find out together, because our guest for the next 2 episodes is Roberta Matutson. Roberta Matutson is a global executive coach who helps organizations hire and keep the best people. Roberta is the president of Matutson Consulting, helping leaders in highly regarded companies, including General Motors, New Balance, Microsoft, achieve dramatic growth and market leadership through maximizing talent. She is the author of no less than 6 books, including her most recent, which is Can We Talk? 7 Principles for Managing Difficult Conversations at Work. Roberta is also a LinkedIn top voice in leadership and workplace. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for returning champion and someone who has verbally wrestled Bill O'Reilly on Fox's The O'Reilly Factor, Roberta Matutson! And the crowd goes wild, young lady.
Wow, that's some introduction. Thank you.
So, Roberta, let's first of all give context because we may have some young leaders on here who've never heard of Bill O'Reilly. Tell us a little bit about who Bill O'Reilly is, or the O'Reilly factor. And as far as I know, there isn't too many people who went on that show on Fox TV and did well. So, tell us about that.
Okay, so it's confession time. When I went on the Bill O'Reilly show, I had never heard of Bill O'Reilly. And really. And so when I went into the Lion's Den, I did so. I was a little bit nervous because when I started to tell people, hey, I'm going to be on the Bill O'Reilly show today, they were like, oh my gosh, he's going to tear you apart. And I thought, whoa. But luckily for me, Bill decided to side with my point of view as opposed to the other person's point of view. But he was known as a guy who really took on some interesting topics and wasn't afraid to say whatever was on his mind. But what was interesting for me is that the topic we talked about was sex in the workplace.
Oh, yeah.
And
he was in favor of it.
Oh, yeah. But what I didn't know at the time
Definitely
was I found out later that the producer that hired me to come on the show, who brought me on, was actually sued Bill O'Reilly for sexual harassment a few months later and won quite a lawsuit.
Yeah.
So
wow.
I guess Bill didn't listen to my advice.
It's pretty interesting that he agreed with you while doing the very thing that you were talking against.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. Because he could have easily come at you knowing that out of his own guilt, right? So,
well, maybe he was afraid he would be in court, but
yeah, maybe he knew that. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, he was, well, still is. He's not dead. We'll use the term interesting character.
Yes. But it was an interesting experience. And, I left the show unscathed. So I felt pretty good about it.
Did it? That's an example, though. And the reason I brought it up here is because it's an example of a difficult conversation. Because, you refer to it as walking into the lion's den. And oftentimes people having difficult conversations feel like that. They feel like they're walking into the lion's den. They don't feel like they're fully armored or protected or prepared for the kinds of conversations they've got to have. And you went in quite naively, right? I mean, that's what you just said, right? So certainly what you're laid out in your book is about not going in naively. So let's just pull back a little bit, because in the context of that, you and I are both consultants. We're often brought in to solve a problem that's not really the problem. It's the problem that I can either conveniently articulate, or it's a problem that I'm more comfortable with speaking about rather than the real problem. What is the challenge that you see in leadership development that's being ignored or being disrespected, sort of pushed to the side, that needs a great deal more attention?
Well, I think this whole business, and I do mean business, around employee engagement is a farce. And it is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Oh, yeah.
Yet companies keep, doing employee surveys, engagement surveys. They have these programs, yet employee engagement is at an all-time low. So, let's just cut to the chase. You don't need to do all of this work to figure out what's wrong and what's going on in the organization. That is, if you're willing to, bring in someone like you or myself to have a conversation with your people to see what they love about the organization and what they don't. And more importantly, your willingness to be open to that conversation and take action.
That is, of course, it sounds basic, right? I mean, it sounds basic, but it's not, because people have all this, shit in their head about what that conversation is going to be. I mean, the book title is Can We Talk? 7 Principles of Managing Difficult Conversations at Work, Navigating Through Those Difficult Conversations. So that conversation is difficult in the head of the person before they go in, even if it's not. And often, you know this as well as I do, oftentimes people come and go, oh, it wasn't that bad. Well, yeah, of course it wasn't, right? It's you know, you're not going in to battle the devil. So let's talk about navigating those conversations. Like, and I guess we're going to start by navigating what's going on inside your own head before you step into the room, whatever the room
Right.
is.
Well, one of the principles that I go into more detail in the book is clarity. And I think oftentimes when we go into these conversations, we do so before we're really clear on what we want to happen as a result of this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So, what will wind up happening is we go into the conversation. Maybe our boss agrees with whatever it is we're bringing up. And because we don't ultimately know what our end goal is, we keep talking. And at the end of that conversation, our boss has changed his or her mind. So it's really getting clear, like, why am I having this conversation? If I'm speaking to an employee about a performance problem, am I doing that just to, check the boxes so I can
Yes.
terminate them? Or am I really trying to help this person because I think they're a valuable member of the team and what I have to say could really make a difference? And those are two very different conversations.
Absolutely. So the let's talk about that clarity piece, because I think I fully agree with you, Roberta. I think that, and by the way, let's put the truth out there. We're not just talking about in business. This is what's happening in your fight with your partner at home. It's what's happening with your teenage kids. Is there's a lack of clarity, and so talk to us about getting that clarity about why I'm having this conversation and the outcome I'm moving towards. Right, those are the two things we want clarity on. Give us a little bit about how to get there, because I'm sure there's a lot of people listening to this right now who are going, I'm just pissed off, or I'm just frustrated, and I know I need to have a conversation, but I don't know how to get clear on what I need to have the conversation about. Help us to get that clarity.
Well, first and foremost, if you're in that situation and you're just pissed off, you're really better at pausing and not having
Mm-hmm.
that conversation right now, because
Yes.
you will say something you will regret. I just had a coaching client tell me that he was going to tell his boss the real truth about what was going on and how unhappy he was. Yet prior to that conversation, he told me, I need to keep this job for at least a year. And those are two very different things. And I just urged him, listen, you're not in the right headspace right now. So just pause, think about what it is you really want to say, because you're about to shoot yourself.
Mm-hmm. Again, we all had a mother or somebody in our lives who said, the old adage, count to 10, right? And I, it may have been very irritating for me to hear that in my teens, but it's bloody good advice, is just to take that pause. But walk us through how to get to the clarity piece, because I think that I think people go, oh yeah, you're absolutely right, I got to get clear, but they don't know how to get clear. And I know you've laid that out beautifully. So please walk us through some of the steps so people can have that, sort of write that down, go away with it and go, oh, okay, I got to get better at that.
Well, I mean, ultimately, you have to say to yourself, what is it that I want to achieve as a result of this conversation? What are the one or two things that I want to achieve? Is it just to make a point? Am I looking to move somebody over to my side of, whatever we're talking about? Like, what is it that you ultimately want to do? And also asking yourself the question, what if I do nothing? What will happen if I do nothing?
Mm.
And if you do nothing and you say nothing, you may say, well, it's just going to get worse. Okay,
Hmm.
so now I'm clear, like I need to move forward. Or in the case where somebody's just pissed off, you know what? If I do nothing, I'll probably calm down and tomorrow it won't even matter. So, just getting really clear. And when you're clear on what it is that you're looking to achieve, you're more open to moving into another principle that I talk about, which is, compromise. You may not get everything you want out of this conversation, We see that at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
We want our spouse to do, all the housework that they're not doing. But my goodness, wouldn't we settle for them just folding the laundry or something? So
Right.
it's just kind of getting clear on where you're willing to compromise and how do you move forward together.
Yeah, how do you move forward together is obviously vital. But I think, the part of the, if we're going to talk about what a if we're going to talk about what a difficult conversation is, there's the hierarchy of power. You have to talk to your boss or somebody who manages you, whatever it is. Difficult conversations have many aspects to them. So difficult conversations can also be peer to peer.
Yes.
And so I'm working alongside of Sally or Bob or whoever it is, who is by my estimate slacking off, my estimate putting work on other people, causing problems for me. I don't have the authority to tell them off, and I'm also working in an environment where my boss has said, deal with your own problems. How do we bring up those conversations? How do we even begin to manage those? Again, I get that we need to get clear about what we want, which is very important, and what is the outcome we're looking for. But how do we start to design that conversation?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because when I started to think about writing this book, you always look at what other books are out there, and there's some really good books out there on difficult conversations, but I could not find a book that wasn't just written for leaders. So when I wrote this book, I wrote it with examples and advice for people who needed to have a difficult conversation with their boss as well as their peers.
Mm,
And so that's what's really unique about this book. And when you're having to have a conversation with your peers, what's really important to keep in mind is what can I say how can I frame this in a way that puts their best interest in mind? Like, why would they comply with my request? How can I use influence? Because that's really what you're trying to do. And so, whatever the situation is, you have to reframe it and think about what can I say to make this person realize that, hey, it's in your best interest as well as mine to do what I'm asking you to do. And so that again takes some time. You got to think that through, right?
yeah. So, as soon as, and I understand the difference, but as soon as you mention the word influence or persuasion, there's the assumption of manipulation. And that's clearly not what you're talking about. So just walk us through a little bit about the difference between those so that our listener can go, I feel manipulative when I'm doing this, but it's not manipulative. So help us to understand the distinction.
Well, when you're trying to use influence, you're trying to get somebody to honor a request that you're making. You're being totally above board. Manipulation is, I've got an agenda here and it's hidden, and I'm going to do whatever I need to. Like, let's talk about a difficult conversation. I really want your job. You are my boss, and I
Right.
want your job. So I'm going to do whatever I need to do on the down low in order to get your job.
Right.
That's a little bit different than saying to your boss, if you're able to back off just a little on me and allow me to do more high level work, that will allow you to leave the office on time and get to your kid's soccer game. I mean, that's a win-win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So these difficult conversations, as we've talked about, go on across the board. They're up, they're down, they're sideways, they're all of those kinds of things. And again, to reiterate, the need for clarity about why am I in this conversation, the need for clarity about what is the outcome I'm looking for with this conversation. But the piece that you just brought up there that I think we have to really sort of take a little bit deeper dive into is what's in it for them. And I think that oftentimes we go into these, quote, difficult conversations, and out of fear, out of our amygdala being hijacked, we stop thinking about the other. We start thinking about how I can come out of this unscathed, rather than thinking about the other. Talk to us about helping our listeners, our viewers, to understand, how do I get into that space where I can think about what's in it for them?
Well, I mean, you kind of have to look at it from your own point of view and say, well, if somebody asked me to do this, why would I say yes? Right.
Mm,
So just thinking about what would make me more apt to agree and what would make me more open to a compromise. Because the thing with these difficult conversations, especially sidewards and up, is that oftentimes, you don't have the power. So you are going to have to come to a place of understanding. And that's where compromise comes in, right? And so if it's my way or the highway, which if you're a boss, you can do, is that the best way? Maybe not, but you certainly can. But if you're trying to get, somebody to do something that you need them to do, it's always better to figure out a way to meet in the middle if you need to.
what's, like, can you give us some examples of doing it wrong? Because I think that, and the reason I'm saying that is simply this, is that, you and I, we've had conversations with people, we're coaching, we're guiding, and they really believe they did it right and it blew up in their face. Whereas you and I can look at it and go, probably blew. So walk us through doing it wrong so that people can have a self-awareness of going, oh yeah, I'm on that track.
Well, to me, doing it wrong is being less than honest. And a
Right.
lot of times leaders are not willing to say what they need to say.
Mm-hmm.
And people have no idea until the day they're fired that they were on the chopping block. They have no idea because you were too afraid to really say the words, if this behavior continues, it could lead to further disciplinary action up to and including termination. Like they don't want to ever say that word. And so the
Right.
employee gets the message like, well, it's not that bad. We had a talk and I get where he's coming from and everything's going to be fine when in fact it's not going to be fine. So I think, I always like to come from a place of transparency. Let's be real here. Let's be honest. Let's lay it out on the table.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point you bring up, Roberta, which is death by downplaying,
I like
right?
that.
Death by downplaying, which is, you know, that minimization. I've talked a lot. I've talked about it from the stage. I've talked about it in my books, which is one of the most destructive things you'll ever say to yourself is, it's not that bad, right? Because you've minimized something, and whether you're the person in power and you say, well, they're not that bad, and then you end up poisoning your own culture, all right? Or you're the employee saying, it's not that bad, and you end up in a job that you absolutely hate, not doing anything that empowers you in any way, and you end up not serving the environment or the culture or the company you're working in. So death by downplaying is really important to address. But in those difficult conversations, you know, for me, let's bring it to the context of relationship generally, right? Because we're all in relationship. You're in relationship with your partner at home, you're in relationship with your kids, you're in relationship with your boss. Even though you may not talk to them very often, that is still a relationship. And when I look at relationships, my wife and I teach a relationship program that we teach for executives and their partners one-on-one, right? It's just a private thing. And one of the things we will say to them all the time is, you know, divorce is not illegal. We know that. But divorce should never be a surprise. Right? It should never be a surprise. And moreover, more than that, because, by the way, 60% of men whose wife asked for divorce were surprised.
Wow.
60%. And the women who asked for the divorce, when they said, your husband was surprised, did it come out of the blue? Then women all said, I've been telling him for years, right? But we're not listening. So we end up in a divorce, and this is key. We end up in a divorce that is based on hate. I hate you. Now I have permission to leave. Whereas what you're talking about in these difficult conversations is, this is not working for me. And I like you, and I like working here, and I want to continue working here, but I have to find a way to make this work so that I don't end up hating the job or hating you, because if you do, you shouldn't be there anyway. So am I right in thinking that that's really a lot of where this is going and what it's about?
Well, I think the key point that you just made that really speaks to me is the listening piece.
Mm-hmm.
When we're in these difficult conversations, how often are we thinking, okay, what am I going to say next? We're not listening, right? You've got your script, you know exactly what you're going to say, what you're going to present, but you're not paying attention. So, even when you talk about, couples at home, like, one person is saying something and the other person isn't really listening because they've got their defense, right? Oh no, I did the laundry 4 times this month. I have a list. When your partner's not really complaining about the laundry, it's everything else, but you're not listening. So I think that listening piece is an area, and I talk a lot about that in the book, about how we need to all be better listeners and not be so gung-ho on, like, I got to win this battle, right? I got to make a point. I got to win, score, move on.
Yeah, it's very important to listen with the intent of hearing versus listening with the intent to answer, and which is what most of us are doing most of the time out of our own defense mechanisms. So a lot of what you're talking about in these difficult conversations is stepping away from that desire to be right, but really getting clear about what you want to get across. It's a vitally important subject. We are already at the end of part 1 of this show. We're going to come back with part 2, but before we do, I want to make sure that you let people know where they can find out about you and find out about all your resources, because I know there's a lot, including 6 books, and much of which is on how to really retain top talent. So please tell everybody where they can find out more about you, and we'll come back from there.
Well, they can go to my website at matutson.consulting.com, MATUSON consulting.com. They can send me a LinkedIn invitation, mention your podcast, because I do get a lot of invites, and I'll certainly accept them if I know they're friends of yours. And then you can follow me on Twitter at Matutson.
Fabulous. And we'll make sure, of course, that the links are all published in the show notes to Roberta's website and all of her social media. We'll make sure that it's there. We're going to come back in just 2 clicks, but stay tuned, because we're going to get into what it's like to have difficult conversation in these Zoom days, where a lot of our co-workers, our bosses, those we're leading, we're having to do that virtually. So how do you have a difficult conversation across the internet on a Zoom video? That's a big challenge. We'll be back in 2. Till then, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about how you can have difficult conversations well.